Hello and welcome to the walkthrough for the guidelines or procedures to the Territorial Impact Minimization licenses for the individual declaration. That's for houses which were built without a permit, without a license, and we're going to look at this new license which has become available and the steps which everybody has to go through. Everybody, including the council, what they have to do, the owners' responsibilities, what they have to do, what they have to give to the councils. The English version of this document clearly exists. It isn't finalized, isn't a definitive version. There are corrections to be made to that document, but it is published. So let's go ahead and have a look at what this document includes. We're just going to skip through from the index page to where the procedures begin, where the two different types of procedure are explained. The first of those being an individual declaration, which I imagine will be 99.9999% of the licenses which are emitted. And then later on, there is an explanation about the much more complex collective procedures. But we're going to limit, this video will be exclusively about the individual declarations. So, as we can see, on the page for Territorial Impact Minimization procedures, there's a chart and it explains how to know which is your case, whether you're in an individual declaration case or whether you're a collective case. And the criteria is fairly simple. It's at the moment, it's exclusively related to the construction density. That's the number of constructions, the number of buildings within a certain area, and that area being 10,000 square meters, a hectare. So the criteria being 9 constructions or less in a hectare is an individual declaration. Now this criteria seems fairly clear, and it is. However, the application of that criteria can get a bit complex as the shape of the area which is taken into account, which that hectare, is not defined. It's not a circle with an area of 10,000 square meters, not a square, etc. It's a shape which makes sense. It's a shape which includes or excludes properties according to what really makes sense. It's actually a very good thing. They've introduced an element of flexibility there. So that's the criteria for knowing which procedure is relevant for you. And let's move on to have a looking at the procedure itself. So on page 35, we find the procedure for the exact step-by-step walkthrough of the procedure for the individual declaration. It hasn't been translated, and I understand why it hasn't been translated. I'm a technical architect, a building engineer, a judicial expert witness. I've been a municipal technical architect, ambassador for the Chartered Association of Building Engineers, and I won the Outstanding Academic Award, Performance Award in the UPV, the University Polytechnic of Valencia, and it took me about 5 times to understand this chart. So I'm guessing that they took a look at this chart, whoever made the translation, and said, "Well, someone else can do that." And I guess that's going to be me having a go at translating it. So that's what we'll do. First line, procedure for the declaration of the individual declaration. And then we move on to these 3 columns. I'm going to go from left to right. So órgano sustantivo, okay, is essentially the body, the entity, the authority, which decides, which takes the decision. However, there is another body, which is the one that has the final say, and that's the órgano finalizador, sort of finalizing body. And let's have a look at that column. So in the individual declaration procedure, the ayuntamiento, the council, is the entity which takes that initial decision. Okay, so that's the beginning of that column. Moving over, we have promotor. Promotor is whoever's requesting this to be done, whatever it is that is being requested to be done. So in this case, it's the request. Well, actually, there are two things which are being requested here. The first step is the declaration. Okay, the first set of procedures and workflow is not for the request of the license, it's for the request of the declaration to be accepted. You want to be accepted as apt or appropriate for being considered for a license, but you're not actually requesting a license at that point. So promotor in this case would be, in most cases, would be the owner of the property. Yeah. So if you have a property of this type and you're hoping to legalize the property, promotor is you. And we move over to órganos sectoriales. Okay. Now this is a very easy thing to understand once you know how things work. So, for example, the water in any area is controlled by the water board. It's an activity which has been externalized. It could be mines, it could be electricity, or it could be water, or whatever. The responsibility for management of that activity is in the hands of an entity. So órganos sectoriales are those entities responsible for a certain bit of the economy or a bit of the, could be a ministry, a bit of the activity, whether economic or not, it could be the environmental body, ministries or entities responsible for a certain activity within a country or within a province or within an autonomic region. Let's go back to the first column, órgano sustantivo. We know that's the council now. Okay, and the first thing is that the council receives a request, receives an application to be considered for this license. We're not requesting the license, but we're receiving an application to be considered as apt for consideration. And the first sort of orange ball says meets the requirements. So from the promotor, the column in the middle, the first one, the first bubble they have there is requesting a declaration, and then it goes to the orange bubble, which says that meets the requirements, and there's a yes flow, and there's a no flow. And we're going to follow the yes flow first. The yes flow means that the municipal technician, which is what I was here in Valencia, they have to make a report, and then they have to decide whether this particular case requires reports from these what we call sectorial entities or not. Okay, and then so that goes from informe técnico, which means the technical report. Then within that report, you'll have these considerations of whether, in addition to the requirements laid down by the law, in terms of things like minimum level of filtration of waste products, etc. Those considerations are general and global, universal, but there may be some local considerations to take into account, or even particular cases to be some aspect of a particular property which needs to be taken into consideration as well, and that can be included within the technical report. And that list of sectorial bodies, the water board or something like that, which also need to be consulted. And then that report would go to the councillors for them to vote on whether it's accepted or not accepted. And that's the green ball. That's the councillors taking their decision whether to accept the situation as apt or not apt. So that's the yes flow. The no flow is pretty similar. Goes down to you need a report just to justify why the application has been rejected, okay, and then it just refers you to a certain article within the law which establishes this type of license, Article 210 of the LOTUP, which is the law, the body of law which governs what happens in terms of development in Valencia, the community of Valencia, and also to SUZ is actually for a type of land called urbanizable, okay, which the license for impact minimization is only applicable for rustic land. For rustic land in Spanish is a term that used to be specific, and now it's like a generic term, because now suelo rústico has been converted into more specific types of land, and the type of land which this license is applicable to is suelo no urbanizable, greenbelt land that cannot be developed. It's not planned to be developed and shouldn't be developed. And so, yeah, the sectorización SUZ, okay, the SUZ, is making a reference to that type of property. That, I mean, it is. I mean, it's saying, okay, there will be properties which essentially meet all the criteria, except for the fact it's built on the wrong type of land. I mean, it's not as if urbanizable, which is land which is undeveloped but which can be developed. Okay, if you make a development plan, you can develop it, but suelo no urbanizable is land which shouldn't be developed. There's a prohibition to being developed. So it isn't a more severe case. It's simply a case which isn't contemplated in this legislation. So it says, okay, it's making a reference to that type of land and says it's not relevant. This license, you're not being rejected due to not meeting the criteria for contamination or density or anything else. It's simply the wrong type of land designation for this type of license. So then the line goes to the promotor, green bubble, and it says notifying the owner. So if the application is rejected, the owner gets notified about that decision being taken. Okay, so now we're going to follow the yes flow, and we go back to the owner. So the councillors take a decision, and in this case it's yes, you're apt for this type of license, and we move on to making a request, solicitud de licencia MIT. Okay, now we're actually making a request for the license itself. So you need a technical report. At that stage, you're trying to prove that your property either meets the criteria for the minimization license, impact minimization license, or will meet the criteria for impact minimization license with the project that you're presenting. Okay, so the owner will need to contact a competent technician, either an architect or a building engineer or technical architect or a civil engineer, and they will prepare a report. In fact, later we're going to see the content. I'll make a video about the content of the technical report. This is just a video about the workflow, but it's important to know exactly what they're going to request from you, so that you can request that to a technician. Once your technical report is prepared, then you present that to the council with your application form and some other documentation, proof of meeting the criteria. So if the sectorial reports need to be requested, they get requested, and that information, which is there's an interesting caveat to that, which is that the reports, the sectorial reports, the result of that report should be, in most cases, positive, as the condition placed on those entities when they are consulted is that the answer should be favourable unless the project you're presenting actually makes things worse. Now we're getting from the blue circular bubble, which is requesting those sectoral reports, we get fed into the left-hand column again, the one where the square sort of rectangular bubble, where it says audiencia a colindantes, which means speaking to the neighbours. And there's a process of publication of the project that you're proposing. There's a period there of 20 days, etc. And with all that information, so with the feedback from the neighbours and the entity, for the sectorial entities, reports, and the project that your technician, your personal technician, has prepared, well, all that goes to the municipal technician. And he makes, you guessed it, a report, informe técnico. So we get fed into that smaller blue rectangle. And well, there's either, obviously the decision's either favourable or not favourable. 99.9% of the time, the councillor's decision, which is that green bubble, circular bubble below the informe técnico, that's going to be based on the technical report. The technical report will say, yeah, it's okay, it meets all the criteria, or there's a problem, there's a snag, they need to do this, that, and the other. That's generally going to be the situation, and the councillors are only interested in this thing going as smoothly as possible. They may have some other considerations. I'm not sure what they might be, but that is possible. Anyway, the final decision is not the municipal technician's responsibility. That is the councillor's responsibility, like all those licensing decisions, and either gets approved and you get given the license, okay, or it gets rejected. So the councillors take the decision, it either gets accepted and you get a license, or you get rejected, denegación, okay, and you get told about that decision. Okay, so now you've got your license and you make the request if you need to make any request from those sectorial bodies, and that's the workflow procedure. So essentially it's make a declaration, the declaration gets accepted, then you make a project, and then you present the project, and the council considers all the factors which could impact that project. The sectorial entities that we were speaking about, they think about your project as well in the case that they're affected, and a decision is taken. And you have, once the decision is taken, this, basically to give you the license or not, then you have to carry out the works. You're informed about the decision, and then you have 4 years to carry out the works which, if there are any, you may present a project saying that you meet all the conditions and there's no works necessary. That is going to be the case in some cases. But in the case that you do require works to be done, then you've got 4 years to do that. Then present the certificate saying that technical certificate that proves that your works have been done, and that's the process completed, at least at the beginning. It is fairly predictable that these works will have to be inspected on a periodic basis. Now that hasn't been formalized yet, but I imagine that's the case because they want to guarantee that these properties are being correctly maintained, because they're isolated, and the situation is that if they're not controlled, they lose control, and that's not something they can permit. So yeah, I imagine there will be a periodic inspection program introduced at some stage. But as far as the workflow for the initial license, that's it. Declaration, approval of declaration, you make a technical project, present that project, that project gets considered by the council and possibly other entities, and then gets approved, and then you have a period of time, 4 years, to complete the works. So that's the workflow. Thank you very much for listening.